maybe hydrogen has allowed me to experience life as someone with environmental ideals, but still being an outsider, because overwhelmingly, almost all the hydrogen in the world is produced from natural gas.
I'm excited to welcome Matthew Klippenstein to Power Struggle. Matthew is a professional engineer and a longtime advocate for hydrogen solutions, fighting for an alternative fuel source for the future. He's been at the forefront of clean energy for over 2 decades, from electric vehicles and wind to today's complex energy systems. A frequent commentator, writer, and industry voice, Matthew helps bridge the gap between emerging technologies, public policy, and real-world deployment, often in unexpected ways. Today, we're going to be talking about hydrogen. We'll be talking about LNG, natural gas, and we'll be talking about wolves and bison. Matthew Klippenstein, it's great to have you finally into Power Struggle. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. I love our energy conversations over the last almost a decade.
Right. Well, thank you very much for having me, Stewart.
You're an engineer, right?
Yes.
What kind of engineer?
So I got my degree in chemical engineering, and I've worked a lot of my time in hydrogen, but also some time in wind energy, EVs, EV infrastructure, and but the majority of my career has been in the hydrogen orbit, I guess you could say.
Okay, chemical engineering. Well, I'm a historian by training, got into journalism. That was my career. So I don't really have any of the formal, science background. And yet I find more and more in my career, my life, my travels, I'm talking to engineers and geologists, biologists, also to lawyers and parliamentarians and people wrestling with all this. And it's the 360 of these energy issues cover all the bases.
Right.
And to understand the totality of it is virtually impossible. Yet you kind of have to see where we are in the world, right?
Right. Well, I think maybe to name drop a mutual friend, Doomberg, energy is life. That's his slogan.
Energy is life.
And just riffing off of that, actually, you're being from the humanities, my being from the sciences. In order to deploy any technology, not just an energy technology, there's a cost dimension, but there's also a consent dimension. So STEM, science, engineering, they can make a technology cheap. You want that, low cost. But you really need the humanities to win the consent to be able to deploy that technology. And so there's the sweet spot for any technology is that it is cheap and it's widely accepted. And I think there's something heartening in the fact that, yes, you need STEM, but you also need the humanities, which have been maybe underrepresented in the public dialogue for a number of decades.
The big opportunities that we've got in Canada. And right now, probably more than ever since I started ResourceWorks in 2014, it seems like the majority of Canadians are lined up with what I see as a kind of energy, climate rationalist point of view, where they're saying, yeah, we're gonna need to build things. For a long time, it seemed like even if people were thinking that, it was like, I'm not gonna step out and say so, certainly not at the barbecue or around the Thanksgiving table with my relatives. It was just something that people kind of held back. But now, suddenly, the world has changed. Trade relations have changed and so much else. What do you think has changed over the years?
Yeah, just to riff off, one of the few humanities courses I took, I think it was a Greek philosophy, some guy, Heraclitus, said the only constant in life is change. So there, Professor Harding out of UBC, probably retired by now. I think one of the dimensions that has changed is that if we think on the political spectrum, then I think in past decades, you often had political progressives being opposed to projects, political conservatives being in favor of projects for various reasons. A lot of them were on the fossil fuel side. But it's like in hockey, you never play offense 100% of the time. You never play defense 100% of the time. What we see with, say, renewables projects in the United States is that we now have progressive political groups who want to help these things get built. And then we have conservative groups who are using the tactics perfected in past decades to impede them or block them. So I think, I guess one of the interesting things in my life is that the first half, my wing of the political spectrum has generally been against projects. Now our part of the spectrum is like, wow, renewables are going to be a big portion, clean energy minerals. And so they want to get things built. And I'm sure there's something parallel that's happened on the conservative side as well. in terms of maybe there's a predisposition to like oil, gas projects, but maybe the aspects of mining, say, might not be in favor to rural communities, conservative voting communities in certain contexts, right? So it's a nice dynamic. Yeah, it's nice to know that my life isn't all one way. The pendulum comes back and forth.
Yeah. When you say your end of the spectrum, just to be clear, that means left of center?
The left of center,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we have seen this shift. You mentioned the tactics of opposition to oil and gas projects have suddenly, at least in the USA, been adopted by the right to oppose wind projects and things like that. That's interesting. What are some of those tactics you're referring to?
So just before we get to the tactics, maybe speaking to my experience. So in 2016, I think this was the summer of 2016, I went through the company that I worked for out to rural Oklahoma. And we were helping a soon-to-be Donald Trump voter, he told us himself, set up a large wind farm, set up data collection for a large wind farm on the local land. And he was very enthused about this project because it would provide royalties. It would help build a new school and maybe community amenities. The same year, I was assigned to help a wind farm in Canada, possibly the only one to get sued by the local community, to do some technical work for them. And so your instinct would be to say, well, Oklahoma, they would like wind. Ontario, they would like wind. But it was a perfect encapsulation of the fact that consent really does matter, right? You can't just ignore stakeholders. You might have unexpected places where projects go forward and unexpected places where they don't. The most famous or infamous example in terms of tactics was, there was a book or maybe a movie that came out, like How to Blow Up a Pipeline. And I'm generally in favor of free speech as long as it doesn't incite violence. So I'm okay with that, the fact that it was published. I have the realization, though, that people who oppose renewables projects are going to read that book, take notes, and might also use the same, whatever those things happen to be, in terms of blocking or vandalizing electric infrastructure. This did happen actually in Washington State around the time the movie came out, but it was like a little bit before. There was no known connection to them and this particular book. Some electrical substations got attacked. And so in terms of the change, I guess I go back to that, no one plays offense all the time or defense all the time, right? It's like there is something out there, maybe you will embrace it, but it might also be used against you, right? So you can't be too hard-headed in terms of, declaring something good or evil. It's more like, is it useful or is it detrimental?
We were comparing notes before we started talking here, Matthew, and we mutually realized that it's exactly to the day 7 years since the biggest capital project, private project in Canadian history was cleared by investors. That would be the LNG, Liquefied Natural Gas Canada, LNG Canada project in Kitimat, which finally opened in late June, early July of this year, 2025. So exactly 7 years ago today was when they announced that FID. A short time after that, my group, ResourceWorks, we did an event to bring some of the economic experts together. We did an event in Vancouver, and I asked you to come and speak because I knew what you were doing in hydrogen, and I also knew at the time there was a real hunger to learn about, okay, what does the future hold? Not just the short-term future, in a few years when LNG Canada gets built and starts shipping natural gas to where it's needed in the world, but also over the longer term. It commenced when we heard what you had to say about hydrogen and how it fit into the future. A bit of a journey. And now, 7 years later, I think that hydrogen story has gone in directions that maybe would have been hard to predict at the time. And I want to find out why that happened. And I would even say, what happened to hydrogen, Matthew? So take me back to how you got involved in the hydrogen story.
So I was a co-op student. I did a co-op term at Ballard Power Systems, a local firm.
Right here in Vancouver.
Yep. And I wasn't sure what to do with a chemical engineering degree because I thought that I wanted to be in an organization which wasn't 10,000 people or larger, right? How could I make my mark? This seemed interesting. It had kind of a niche in terms of its potential for environmental benefit, to be a lower emitting solution than liquid fossil fuels. And so I did a co-op there. I worked there after I graduated, that and some related companies for about 15 years. It's been a fascinating journey, hydrogen-wise, because you see many of the characteristics of early technologies. There's a metaphor called the Gartner hype cycle, where something has some event to kick it off. Maybe we're at this stage with AI. There's a peak of expectations. AI is going to take over the world. Then there's some sort of trough of disappointment where you realize the difficulties are that come in, and then you gradually, develop into a sustainable market.
Just on Ballard Power, so that's a Vancouver company. I remember when that was surging. You talk about the hype cycle.
Yes.
And I was in the news business back when Ballard was this hot new story. I think that stock ran up over $200.
It was part of the internet bubble, yes.
Yeah, it was huge. And the promise of it was that you would have hydrogen as a transportation fuel, but then they started building like generators, and they had to deal with, I think, Coleman stoves for taking it into the remote places. And it had this bright future, but then it didn't end that way. Although Ballard is still around today.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So there you were at the peak of the hype cycle, starting your career in hydrogen.
That's right. I think we've had another hype cycle that peaked around 2021 for a lot of clean energy technologies. What happened is Biden gets elected in November. People rush into renewables or other cleaner technologies. I think possibly nuclear might have even part of that as well, because it is a clean source of energy. And then what happened is the expectations get high, and then you get this weeding out process where the folks who have some substance to their plans tend to survive, and a lot of folks fall by the wayside. Maybe the way to describe this is that a recent publication by the Hydrogen Council, it's an industry association worldwide, hydrogen trade association basically. So they found that about 500 of their 1,700 tracked project announcements had reached FID or later. So that's a survival rate of maybe 29%. And without context, that's difficult to get a hold of. If we think about BC's LNG sector, we had maybe 18 or so projects proposed, of which several are going forward, maybe 4 or 5. And that's a fairly similar survival rate with the hydrogen projects worldwide. More interestingly, we have interesting data from the United States where one of the national labs, I think it's Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, compiled all the solar and wind projects that applied for transmission access. This is between 2000 and 2018. As of the end of 2023, only about 25% of those project proposals had actually been built. This applies both for solar and for wind. And so you have this, I think, universal low survival rate for technologies that's very promising and emerging. Hydrogen's in the doghouse, if you will, where a lot of the fluffy projects that didn't really have a good economic case have gotten shelved. And then we have a more sustainable core going forward.
When you look closer at hydrogen as, say, an export fuel, and although that's talked about a lot, it's not done much, if at all. And you say, okay, what are the requirements of having a mature industry involved in the transport of gaseous fuel sources like natural gas, for example? Well, in LNG, you've got probably close to or more than 1,000 LNG carriers, ships. You have probably around 1,000 LNG tankers in the world that take LNG to where it needs to go. You've got the supply chain on either side. You've got the liquefaction, and then at the customer end, you've got the regasification side. You've got the commodity pricing so that markets understand what this thing is worth, and you can do contracts 20 years in advance. You can do spot trading. All of that stuff is just normal, like you're buying stocks in Microsoft or Pork Bellies or something. It's all normalized. None of that exists for hydrogen.
That's right.
Yet. So, I mean, it's not a knock on hydrogen that it's a new emerging thing. It's just that it hasn't had time for some of these sort of basic structural elements of being a traded commodity to come into existence yet.
That's right. It's like not all the steps are in place, or all the puzzle pieces maybe are in place.
Yeah.
And now, to me, that's a feature, because I think it's more exciting to go from 0 to 1 with respect to hydrogen markets, regional markets. It's wonderful to go from, say, 1 to 3, maybe in terms of total electricity usage in various countries as we decarbonize. But to me, I think it's cooler to look at going from 0 to 1. However big that 1 winds up being, I think it's really cool to be on the front, see that at the front edge. It's like, I don't know, watching an egg hatch into a chick, maybe, something like that. It's like, wow, that happened.
Yeah, and the innovations required are bridging a much bigger space, proportionally more influential space at the early end, whereas the later ones are about refinement and the market fit and
that's right, yeah,
that end of things.
So we have used as a globe natural gas in large volume for, I don't know, 100 years, something like this. And before you had carbon pricing or concerns about pollution, why wouldn't you use natural gas? Now, a lot of the energy in the natural gas comes from the hydrogen, maybe half from the carbon atom, half from the hydrogen. And so it makes perfect sense to me that hydrogen wouldn't scale up under those conditions. There's no carbon pricing, there's no worry about pollution. The neat thing with hydrogen is there are a variety of ways to obtain it. And then where you can substitute it for other things, then that's a great way of decarbonizing, being cleaner, while also maintaining a lot of the human knowledge about gas processing, for example. There's a popular bumper sticker, a popular slogan about electrify everything. And I think as a bumper sticker, it works well. I think there's a little bit of an analogy I could make to Yellowstone National Park, of all things.
Okay.
So once upon a time, ignoring indigenous wisdom, folks like you and me had the idea that bison were good and wolves are bad. Yellowstone National Park should only have bison. After many years of patient advocacy, the park rangers or whoever reintroduced wolves. There are a bunch of beautiful viral YouTube videos about this where the introduction of wolves or the maintenance of a wolf population provided this ripple effect of ecological benefits all across the park. And I think it's a very similar situation here with gas energy. Electrons can do a lot of stuff. That's fantastic. Molecules have a role as well. And I think hydrogen is well-placed to be part of that, probably not all of it, but to play a part of that in providing a really resilient, robust energy system, which stays clean. Because you're not trying to turn everything into bison, basically.
One of the things about hydrogen is it seems to have served as a proxy in the energy culture wars, if that's a phrase, where you have this polarization, hey, I'm all for clean energy, but when you realize that clean energy kind of exists in juxtaposition to its opposite number, dirty energy, you realize, wait a minute, this seems like it's more political language than, say, functional, engineering description. And I don't criticize anyone for using the term to advance it. I don't mean it in that sense, but still I am critical of it because what it seems to perpetuate, which is this kind of Manichaean zero-sum game of, well, what side are you on, clean or dirty? Well, it turns out that no matter what side you think you're on, 80% of the energy in your life comes from what some would call dirty fuels. Well,
fossil fuels, yeah.
Fossil fuels, oil and gas and coal combined is that 80%, or maybe a little less, depending on where you live. Right. 75 to 80. It's changing very slowly over time, but it's going down. But so it seems to me that if we want to be consistent with how we live and what we do, eat food that's been fertilized with these natural gas made fertilizers, and we go on airplanes, et cetera, do we want to spend our lives in the sackcloth and ashes of self-criticism for consuming the things that are required for the very active life? Or do we have some confidence that we are able, as humans, to apply technologies and knowledge, efficiencies in a progressively better way? And so we can get away from the polarizations, which maybe serve some political purpose, I guess, but aren't necessarily that helpful.
Yeah, noting that in academia, there is a desire to get away from clean versus dirty and to use an objective measure like carbon intensity. There are fierce discussions about what those carbon intensities should be, but in academia, at least, there's a broad agreement, there's a general consensus. I would say that maybe hydrogen has allowed me to experience life as someone with environmental ideals, but still being an outsider, because overwhelmingly, almost all the hydrogen in the world is produced from natural gas. And so on that account, many people who I would otherwise, whose approval, say, that I would otherwise, hope to achieve, classified hydrogen in the dirty category, which is kind of annoying. I think this goes back to this whole consent versus cost dimension of technology, because if I had been in solar and wind all my life, I would have this massive blind spot of what it feels like when someone calls your pet passion dirty. So I do want to just acknowledge that as one of the upsides, say, on the hydrogen front. In terms of decarbonizing, both Red, I think, listened even to Vaclav Smil. He has the facts behind him that the energy transitions are quite slow. And I think, did you also interview Fressoz?
Jean-Baptiste Fressoz.
That's right.
We had him on Power Struggle last year.
That's right.
And he argues that, well, there's not really an energy transition, there's an energy addition, because it takes way longer for fuels like wood. We're still using as much wood as we ever did. We might be using it in somewhat different ways. And then coal, and his point was these things just don't happen. It's not an off switch.
I have absorbed their insights and adjusted my energy transition, or energy evolution maybe. That might be a preferred term some listeners have. One thing I note from Fressoz is that you had this situation where a lot of wood in the UK in the 19th century was used, instead of being burnt for firewood, it was used to prop up the mines to dig up the coal. That's
yes.
Right. And to me, that would still be a category that maybe we can have a huge success out of in Alberta with the oil sands. The big criticism of the oil sands is how carbon intensive it is to burn them. But if you could use the starting bitumen to make carbon fiber precursors or asphaltene. One big insight from Fressoz is that wood consumption in the UK increased even as coal came on, because you used the wood to prop up the mines. That's a case where you're no longer burning the wood. And for us in the 21st century in Canada, I think the metaphor is, well, what if we use the oil sands for something apart from burning them? If you use them to make high-value carbon fibers or other products, maybe asphalt components, then does it really matter how much we scoop out of the ground, as long as they're not being burnt and causing CO2 emissions? We have to make sure that the environment is treated appropriately, of course. And so I'm hopeful, even with what Fressoz has noted, what Smil has noted, is that even if we wind up consuming more of a particular good, as long as we're not combusting it and adding that CO2 to the atmosphere, as much of a worry. I guess the other thing that is a bit of a tailwind, a bit of an advantage that Smil and Fressoz get, is that since about 1800, world population has gone from 1 billion to 8 billion. We're not going to 64 billion, anytime soon. And so I would be really interested in the year 2100 to spiritually hover over with Smil to see if that little chart of exponentially increasing energy growth continues, or at least at that rate.
Yes, well, the current trends, which have been revised on population growth, is that we're going to see a flattening even sooner. There's a whole bunch of countries that were expected to flatten out in growth later, but suddenly are going into that decline in population growth simply because women are having fewer children.
Right.
In all kinds of countries where it wasn't thought that would happen so fast. So we could be in 2100 and suddenly there's a smaller, I'm not sure if a smaller population than now, I'm not sure what the curve looks like, but the kind of doomsday scenarios really no longer have the same traction if these trends continue.
That's right. Maybe I want to emphasize that we want to have human flourishing. We want to have everyone, or as many people as possible, having a first world equivalent lifestyle of the year 2025. That will consume more energy. I think a lot of that energy, just based on the rate of build out, will come from renewables. I think, like the analogy I've sometimes used is that poorer countries, maybe they get like one of these 12-ounce pop cans worth of more fossil fuel use. But they'll get like a 4-liter jug of milk worth of renewables. I still see that there's, and it's universally recognized, there's a need for dispatchable energy. You want to have things that can turn on in the middle of winter, for example, to keep your grid going. At the same time, the pace of technology, the build out of any technology really in China will allow us to attain that flourishing probably with fewer fossil fuels than was expected by cynics of renewable energy growth.
Yeah, and you think of Africa and cell phones versus wireline. Africa without a lot of telephony, suddenly it has all the telephony it needs because people have cell phones. It skipped that phase of having to do this massive copper wire build out of a phone system. And I think the suggestion is that it will also be able to skip massive energy infrastructure from the, say, North American or European trajectory.
Right, yes. Now, I don't think that's going to skip entirely. It's not like a clean break, but maybe...
It sounds debatable as to whether it will play out that way, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, I would imagine that, like when I was in school, there was an article in a journal saying that, it would require more copper than there was in the world to connect every person in China to a telephone, right? And you have these, we've only had 30 years of oil left since I was like a kid in 1980, right? We are pretty good at obtaining more resources. Well, I guess what I want to say is that I can see a lot of energy addition, maybe the vast majority of energy addition being brought through renewables, through solar in particular, batteries, wind. But it is hubris to declare that we don't need dispatchable, concentrated sources of energy, which is what we've often used hydrocarbons are, fossil fuels when they're from fossil sources. And so I would come in on the midpoint between the very idealistic people who want everything to run on renewables. Maybe they don't have as much on the consent challenges with transmission, say, but nor am I in the category of, fossil fuels will increase in capacity forever.
Could you just come back to firm or dispatchable power and explain what that is? Because hearing it from you, you're a hydrogen advocate, you're a renewables advocate, you've said you're from the left side of the political spectrum. What does someone of your description say about what you might think of as natural gas typically, but it could be coal? Increasingly in North America though, we've swapped large amounts of coal for large amounts of natural gas. So that is the new firm power, right?
Right.
And how does it work?
So there is a catch-all phrase to say that wind and solar are intermittent. And it's true, the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun's not always out. There's a slightly more precise terminology used to say that wind is intermittent. You can't really predict when it'll come or not, but that solar is variable because the astronomy and so forth, you can say, well, June 24th in Vancouver will be exactly this long. You will have something within a certain amount of solar. You might have very little or you might have a certain amount, but it's only variable as to whether it happens to be sunny or cloudy that day. So those are generally intermittent sources. Dispatchable power is power that you can generate at will. Hydropower, as we have in Canada, is a beautiful example of this because, for example, if the price of electricity is negative in California, we can import their power, and then later on, maybe during peak hours, we can dispatch that power by opening our dams further. I do realize that Resource Works has noted that the electricity deficit at the moment, but that doesn't change the fact of the dispatchability of hydro. It's great utility. Not everywhere lives in mountainous regions, and so in many parts of the world, natural gas and in some places coal are used as this dispatchable dispatchable power to generate electricity because no one wants to have power interruptions as soon as they can afford to have a stable grid.
And what do you think that means for the speed of changes in the energy system?
Pairing solar with batteries has proven remarkable in areas as they've increased deployment. So there was or there remains a concern in California about this thing called the duck curve, where you have a curve that kind of looks a little bit like a duck, where you have a little peak of electricity demand in the morning. When it's sunny, solar panels provide a lot of power, so you get this kind of decrease. And then in the evening hours, you get this rapid increase of additional power required. Now, a shocking thing happened this spring where the duck curve actually flattened out. There was so much midday solar absorbed by batteries and dispatched in the early evening hours, at peak use hours, that they didn't actually see a peak. So I think there's a tremendous amount that, with more solar and solar in particular, with battery storage, can help to address these peaks. However, unless you happen to live in Hawaii, maybe I don't know, Nevada, Arizona, you are going to have rainy days and cloudy days and snowy days. As more applications become electric, you will have a corresponding need to have more dispatchable power. We might see scenarios where as regions decarbonize, wonderful, good for them, the electric grid size expands, and so you actually have to build more dispatchable peaker plants, more dispatchable power for those midwinter emergencies or something like that.
It's actually referred to as the January 2024 event. And there's all these reports out there. It happened in Western Canada and the Pacific Northwest of the US. Right. 25 million people live in states, provinces in this area. And I've been hearing from a lot of engineers and power system people about this, and I started to look into it. I've been reading quite a few reports on it, and it's quite surprising. I mean, in northern Alberta, one energy utility that distributes electricity that it creates mainly from natural gas, or all from natural gas, did the sums and worked out that over the several days of the cold snap, that the energy it supplied to the system to keep things running, all of it derived from natural gas. If you had to swap that out for batteries that were storing electricity you'd made somehow, maybe by wind, maybe by some other means, you would need, the amount of batteries you need to serve 1 million people in northern Alberta in those cold days, 40 below, would be, I think it was all of the EV, electric vehicle lithium batteries manufactured in the world in 2022 times 13. 13 years of 2022, that's how much battery you'd need to serve those million people in the depths of the cold snap. And the monumental scale of amount of energy we use is one of the factors that will make it incredibly difficult to get to this, 100% this or 100% that outcome. I mean, isn't it going to be a lot more time-consuming and complex in terms of how we change energy systems over time?
So that's where I would return to my wolf and bison analogy. So pursuing electrifying absolutely everything, I can see the idealism behind it. I can see how someone arrives at that. I still don't see that as an optimum, the healthiest solution. I think in the United States, the last I checked, I think there were 83 gigawatt hours worth of battery storage. So that's not Canada. I mean, we have dams, but 83 gigawatt hours. And in Canada, every year we draw down our natural gas underground reserves by the thermal equivalent of 110,000 gigawatt hours, so several orders of magnitude. Now, I'm sure the battery storage will increase. There's lots of progress being made. That's wonderful. I think that for a resilient or a robust system, you will always need gas backup. You will always need gas supply as the safety valve almost to make sure you don't run out of the stuff of human well-being. You don't run out of heat or power in the middle of winter.
You're a real heretic then, because you said you will always need that. I mean, everyone else seems to be saying, oh, we'll need it for a few decades. And I never find out what they think will happen after those few decades end. But you seem to be saying, those decades could last a long time.
In my vision, in my heart of hearts, gas energy, people assume that means natural gas. As societies become more prosperous, we can tend to be a little bit more picky in sort of what we do. And I could see hydrogen playing a role for that in some capacity. Yeah. And so that would be, so hydrogen, if it's generated cleanly, of course, hydrogen is a vector, it's a path to achieving a robust system, a rugged grid, a rugged heat services, complementing electricity without the emissions. And you get to keep a lot of the same skill sets. It's like one of those just transition things. It's a very different to say it versus have someone say it to you. But you can have a lot of expertise that we use for fossil fuels isn't specific. Like there's wonderful work being done on geothermal power, for example, which is dispatchable. It's firm power. And again, you can keep a lot of people, maybe mid-career people, doing the very similar activities, just redirected a little bit. And then you don't have this image of these young idealistic people hectoring older people like, you should live my way of life, things like that. Again, going back to the consent thing, There's a little bit of an egotistical thrill to hold yourself superior to some other person, but that doesn't really make progress happen. But quite the opposite, actually, right?
We've had some incredible conversations about the future and some wild possibilities. I know you've been working on some ideas. You've had a paper you've been developing. I don't think we have time on this podcast to get into it, but what's your starting point for thinking about that longer term future? I mean, if humanity is going to be around for a long time, it's going to need a lot of energy for a long time. It's going to need to do it on the same planet. I don't think we're all going to Mars. Maybe Elon will, and we'll see how it works out. But for those of us staying back here, we want to have a fit planet for a long time. What's the big picture, like the 1,000-year picture?
I guess for me, the focus is that there's a lot of attention is paid to efficiency. And efficiency has its merits, but I think the real key property of a complex system, our energy systems are certainly complex, is how resilient it is or how robust. Resilience means you can bounce back from a disruption, like that they bounced back in the Great in Europe when they had that Iberian shortage. But better still is robustness, which means you actually never lose functionality. I have great hopes that with the extremes that we see, which are getting more intense, that we get more attention paid to a robust energy system as opposed to a more mathematically efficient one. Efficiency comes out of the study of simple machines, widgets or whatnot, wonderful. But the concepts of resilience that we have come out of the study of complex systems, right? That is, the resilience is the defining feature of a long-lived complex system. If we can have more people talking about resilience, or again, robustness, then we can set our energy systems up to be long-lived and sturdy and not rickety. And that will allow us to have more well-being on the human side, even as we work to reduce the emissions portion, the emissions side effects, if you will, of these rugged energy systems.
So does that make you an optimist?
I would say that I'm more optimistic now than I was 25 years ago. One reason for that is that you could see these climate trends and you couldn't really see any technologies that were coming up of substantial size. And now, thanks in large part to the industrial machine that is known as China, then we do have these technologies that are scaling up quickly. I'm not utopian. I don't believe in extremes. Maybe I'm pragmatic. Again, wolf and bison. That's a place for both. But I am more hopeful that my grandkids or great grandkids will have a better future now than I would have been earlier on, without the accumulated 20 years of wisdom and weight behind me.
Another LNG project. So 7 years since we saw that big one get approved and now built. We've got others coming along. So hopefully it won't be 7 years until we're back here, but I really appreciate you coming in, Matthew.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. And I really appreciate you thinking of me, Stewart.